Welcome to Motherhood and ADHD. I'm your friend, Patricia Sen. My mission is to be a lighthouse for mothers with ADHD, helping you find your path to success by learning to appreciate your ADHD as an asset. I'm seeking to change the paradigm that ADHD means your life is doomed to be a hot mess. So I'm sharing strategies and encouraging you in your pursuit of happiness to love who you are every day of your ADHD life. Hey there, Successful Mama. It's your friend Patricia. In the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about my lessons from therapy. Now, keep in mind that today's episode is not kid-friendly, so if you have tiny ears around, please pop in those headphones. My other disclaimer for today is that I am not a doctor. I don't have any fancy letters after my name. I am simply relaying to you what I learned during my sessions with my therapist. So keep in mind, I am not diagnosing you with anything. I'm not telling you that you don't need to go to therapy because Patricia said something really awesome. What I want to do is pique your interest so that you realize that you have options out there. And here's an example of when you find someone who's the right person for you, the gains and strides that you can make in your life when you build a really strong team around yourself. So, first topic of what I learned in therapy is learning to let go of thoughts. Not all thoughts deserve your attention. I know that sounds really obvious, but it was kind of mind-blowing for me. I assumed that everything my brain created and was floating around and came up with was relevant and important and somehow reflected on me. And that's not true. And not every thought that comes through your head deserves your brain power. One of the things that I have most loved about therapy is in talking to someone who knows a lot about thoughts. I have just gained so much freedom in understanding what is quote unquote normal or usual and what's not. The funny thing about thoughts is that when we have ADHD, we have so many thoughts running around our heads, and we don't necessarily know what is normal because we can only know our own thoughts. We don't know what anyone else is thinking. They don't know what we're thinking, which is a good and a bad thing, I guess. But because we don't know what other people are thinking, we don't know that what we're thinking is or is not usual. And so knowing that some of the things I was thinking were very usual, maybe not normal, but very usual, very common, and that there were strategies to deal with that was just so liberating. There was so much freedom in that, in knowing that, hey, you're not the crazy person, one out of a million. It's like, hey, a lot of people deal with this and there's ways to fix that. So let's jump into how I learned to deal with thoughts. I was trying to find a good example of this, and here's what I came up with. So I hope this analogy is helpful. When you're at like the pool or the beach and a very attractive person walks by, because you are at the beach or the pool, they're probably very scantily clothed and your eye is drawn towards it. Now, depending on your situation, you might be free to watch the show, if you will. Now, if you're in a relationship, maybe you shouldn't be oogling at the show. It depends on your situation. Judgment-free zone here. But for this scenario, pretend you're in a relationship and you should not be oogling at the show out of respect for your partner. You cannot control that person walked by. You can't get rid of them. They are allowed to be at the pool or the beach just as you are. So just like in your brain, when your thoughts show up, you can't control all the thoughts that appear. They're going to just show up. But what you do control is how you react to them. So if you think about you're at the pool, you see very attractive person go by. At one end of the spectrum, you have people who are ooglers. They're rude, they're disrespectful, they're catcalling, they're making comments. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where you have people who are like, look at me here, not looking at that person. I know that this person just walked by, but I am not looking at them. I am focused on you. Significant other, I did not pay one bit of attention to that person. Look at me, I'm turning away. And it kind of reminds me of the Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They're making this big fuss over not reacting. Or they take it to another level and they just don't go to the pool ever, so they never have to see any scantily clad people. But there is a way to be in the middle. You can notice that that person showed up and then you just look away. You let them go on about their day. It does not touch your mental energy. And I was thinking about this because I have a friend who makes a really big deal about her husband not looking at other women. It doesn't matter if they're in person, if it's on TV. And so I am nosy and I asked, like, is this like something he's had an issue with? And she's like, no, he's never been a cheater. It's not like he cheated on people in the past. And she doesn't really have any reason not to trust him to make a good choice. But she asks him to, like, don't look, turn away, like turn off the TV. We don't watch those kind of movies. Do not look at that girl going by, because fear. She is afraid of where that might lead. In knowing my friend, I know that this is because she has a family history of cheaters and she's very aware of that. It's very uncomfortable for her. She's very scared of this happening to her in her relationship. And so she's taken that pendulum way off on one side, but she's given that thought so much power. She is allowing that thought to make her anxious, to make her paranoid, to give into that fear. She is threatened by something that isn't necessarily threatening. And this is what intrusive thoughts are. When we give too much power to the thought and we allow that fear of the thought to grow and grow and grow, which to us looks healthy because we think we're dealing with the problem. But instead, what we're doing is allowing something that doesn't deserve power to have a whole lot of it. So that intrusive thought just keeps pounding you in the head, pounding you in the head. You're so aware of it that you feel like you can't. It's not that you can't, you feel like you cannot get rid of it without dealing with it. And so you come up with ways to counteract it in the way that you think about it, in the things that you do. And where that becomes an issue is that, she's talked to her husband about it. He knows about the family history and all, so it's not a surprise to him. But what you can end up with is him feeling like she doesn't trust him. And that could create a level of defense and, drive a wedge in between them later on because she's giving so much power to the fear. And what I learned from my therapist is that usually when people have these kind of intrusive thoughts, these OCD thoughts, the obsessive compulsive thought, this driving thought that they cannot get rid of, usually it's driven from a place of trying to be too morally conscious. Their pendulum swings way off to the other side because they're trying so hard to be good, but they take it over the top to the point where it's actually harming them. So let me pause for a moment and fill in the background for a second. So in case you're not familiar, intrusive thoughts are unwanted either thoughts or images in your head that you find either distressing or disturbing, and then you start to obsess over those thoughts and dealing with them. And then the compulsion part is basically the actions you do in order to cope with the thoughts. So that's where you get the obsessive compulsive disorder name. So for me, my intrusive thought was about harming my kids. I kept worrying, what if I drop them? What if I'm not paying attention and then they drown in the bathtub? What if they get molested because I let them go to a friend's house and I didn't check them out and it turns out that the uncle that visited them was a pedophile? Like, I would just take all these what ifs way off. And what I was doing was allowing the fear to control my decision making. Running through all those what ifs is giving control to the fear. Because I was trying so hard to keep my kids safe, I let that fear run off the tracks. I also have this issue when it comes to control. Like, I am definitely worried extra about my husband passing away because my mom died when I was young, and then my dad had teenagers still at home, and he didn't really have a plan on what he was going to do if my mom passed away, which really, we all hope we never have that need for the plan. But for me, I have this whole what if situation of like, okay, if my husband were not to be here, here's what I would do. Here's what I do about the house. Here's what I do about money. Here's the job I'm going to go get. Here's I have this whole planned out, and I've got like contingencies B, C, D, and E, because in working all that out in my head, it's a way for me to control the fear, because I know, okay, I will be okay because I know that I'm going to do steps 1 through 57 to be okay in that situation. But I'm giving too much control to that fear. So it's kind of this ironic system, because I think that by creating the 57-step plan, that I then have control over the situation. But really what I'm doing is I've given my control up and I've given my power to the fear, and I have spent way too much energy on something that is highly unlikely. And so I thought that by thinking through all of these things, that I was creating safety, but instead I was actually creating more fear in my life. I was creating more stress, and I was giving so much of my time and energy to something that doesn't matter. The likelihood is so small. Why am I investing this level of energy and thought into something that will probably never happen? So what I learned is that I was taking it too far, trying to control the situation when my fears started to get the best of me. Instead, now, as soon as that thought comes in my head of the what if fill in the blank any terrible situation happens, now I know that I don't have to have a 30-step plan in case this happens. I can just let that go. It is not worth my time and energy. The likelihood that I'm ever going to be in all of these what if situations in my head and need to figure out a way to survive, so slim. So slim. So it's not worth the time and effort and the mental energy that I'm putting into creating this plan. So instead of trying to control the fear, I just let it go. Now, how did I learn how to do this? It was not easy. If you want more background on cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm going to post in the show notes the podcast that my therapist had me listen to. It is called Invisibilia, The Secret History of Thoughts. Now, fair warning, it is not kid-friendly. It is actually quite disturbing. It talks about people who have OCD thoughts towards harming others. So fair warning, it was a lot. But if you're interested in the topic, it's a really good podcast. But here I'm going to break it down for you in a quick summary. So if you're not interested in listening to horrible death stories, you can just get the summation here. Basically, back in the day, Freud's perspective was that every thought in your head is linked to something else floating around in your brain. For example, I'm really worried about my children being molested because I was sexually assaulted when I was younger. That makes total sense as to why that would be a thought that's floating around in my head. However, when we think about disturbing thoughts where we don't see the link, this is where people start to feel like there's something wrong with them. For example, I'm really worried about dropping my kids. To my knowledge, I was never dropped. I don't know where this comes from. And so this is where people start to think, oh my goodness, there is something wrong with me that I keep thinking I'm going to toss my children over a ledge. However, the new way of thinking is using cognitive behavioral therapy, where we recognize that some of our thoughts don't mean anything. You just have to let them float away. There's nothing wrong with me because I worry about dropping my kids. Yes, that thought comes in, but most people don't think 2 seconds about it. The thought just floats away, and so they don't notice them. So as a side note, keep in mind, I am not a scientist. This is just something I'm really curious about. But because with folks who have ADHD, we think so many more thoughts. There's so many things running around our head. I'm really curious, and I need to do some more research, I suppose. I wonder if because, say you have 1 out of 100 thoughts, that there is something terrible going to happen. And most people, if you say, I'm just picking numbers here, say most people have 1,000 thoughts in a day. So that means they only have 10 weird, disturbing, strange things that pop up during their day. So if you only have 10 of those, you probably just ignore them. You're like, whatever, that doesn't even matter. But when you have ADHD, you always have so many thoughts running around your head. I'm like, okay, if the normal person has 1,000 thoughts a day, I probably have like 10,000 thoughts a day, which then if you multiply that, that means I have 100 crazy thoughts in my head. And I'm much more concerned about 100 crazy thoughts than 10 crazy thoughts. And so that's just like my random musing of the day. I really am curious about that and would be so interested to read research on that. But that was a tangent. Let me get back on task. So, using cognitive behavioral therapy, my therapist walked through this with me. So if I'm holding my kids over a ledge, like a picture, like I'm at the Grand Canyon, I'm dangling my baby over the ledge, would I let go? No, I wouldn't let go. I would never let that happen. I would fight tooth and nail to hold on to my babies until my arms literally fell off before I would let them go tumbling down the Grand Canyon. So I was able to think through that and understand that is so unlikely that I would just let my kid fall over a ledge, right? I don't need to give that thought any attention. It doesn't deserve my brain power. It doesn't deserve my energy, my thoughts, any of that. So I just have to let it go. But when you've been thinking about this over and over again, it's hard to rewrite what your brain is thinking. So what you have to do is give your brain examples and collect evidence up to show your brain there is a different way to think about this. So I was able to look back, and there was a time where I was walking down the stairs. Actually, this happened twice now. We have very slippery stairs. They're wood, and I have learned not to wear socks in my house. So I was walking down the stairs and I slipped, and I was carrying my oldest at the time. He's about 8 months old. And I did like a baseball slide with like 1 foot in front and 1 foot back down the last 4 or 5 stairs. And my mom ninja skills kicked in, and I held on to him with like the jaws of life death grip. He was clutched to me so tight, and he was totally fine when we arrived at the bottom of the slide. I was not. I was black and blue for like 2 months. My legs were a mess. But I was able to think back and say, you know what? In that moment where we started falling, I saved him. I held on to him. I made sure he was perfectly safe, and I took the brunt of the fall for him. It also happened a few years later. Thankfully, I was not wearing socks. I had slipped carrying my second kid on the stairs. And I was able to mount the evidence of like, hey, in those times where I could have dropped my child, I didn't. I held on to him. I kept him safe. I put him first. Once I recognized that in the past, in situations where I could have dropped him or either of them, that gave me the confidence to try something a little more brave. So I was still scared, but then I didn't feel so helpless, I guess would be the right word, when I walked closer to railing. So before this, anytime I was carrying one of my kids and we were at a railing going over to like a foyer or something where you could see down to the floor to whatever below, I would not get anywhere near that railing. I would be sure to stay on the opposite side. So that following weekend that I had at this point in my therapy session where we discussed this and we pointed out the evidence that no, I was not going to drop them, I was able to then, we were at the Austin Children's Museum. It's called the Thinkery. Very cool if you're ever in the area. And upstairs, there's a railing over the stairway that comes up to the second floor. And I was able to walk next to that railing, and I didn't have a worry that somehow my kid was just going to go toppling over the edge. And so then I've just been practicing since then. Obviously, I still have a death grip on my kid, but putting myself in situations where they're slightly more risky than the time before. Like, I'm not actually going to just like hold my kid over the railing. That's not the point of this exercise. The point is to do things that are like a little bit scarier than the hump you went over last time until you feel comfortable that that's not a obsessive compulsive intrusive thought. So at this point, I am still cautious of the railing, but I can walk past it next to it and not feel panicked. And I know that with time that will get easier and easier, but I'm rewriting the narrative in my brain and I'm showing it. Here are all the ways that I can do these hard things, and they'll get better and better. Now, do I think that I'll ever get to a point where I just breeze by a railing with my kids? Probably not. But I mean, I'm hopeful that maybe I will, but at least that I don't feel panicked and I don't have this mindset that I'm an awful mother because I think I'm going to drop my kids over the railing. I don't need to beat myself up for that. Having a cautionary approach to being near a railing with a small child is safe. That's smart. That's being careful. But I haven't let it take me over the edge of, oh my goodness, what a horrible person I am that I could ever even think about dropping my kid over the railing. I'm taking that fear and I'm putting it in its place. I am well prepared and I am cautious, but I am not paranoid and I am not beating myself up for worrying about these things. I just don't give that thought attention anymore. When it comes in, I say, nope, that's not worth thinking about, and I let it go. Now, if you have thoughts that are rooted deeper than this example that I've explained, you can actually, with your therapist, do the cognitive behavioral therapy together. Like, you can practice doing the scary things together so that you can mount that evidence for your brain to show we don't have to worry about this because this is a safe thing for me. And that's what the podcast that I mentioned, Invisibility, it goes in depth with doing cognitive behavioral therapy, which was fascinating and scary to me all at the same time. So what I want to bestow on you is that if you are struggling with intrusive thoughts, there is hope out there. Before my psychiatrist mentioned this, I never even knew this was a thing. I just thought my brain thought these things. I didn't even know there was a name to put to them. I mean, when she was like, I think maybe you have OCD and you should go discuss this with a specialist about intrusive thoughts, I was just like, I'm sorry, what? A, I don't need any more problems. And B, there's no way this is a thing that I have. I got over it and I found a really great person to work with. But I want you to know that there is that hope out there, that if you are struggling with these thoughts that you cannot get rid of, that you cannot let go, there is a way to move forward with them through cognitive behavioral therapy. And if it's something maybe you're like, I can't afford that, or I can't do that with whatever situation I'm in, you can start working on the basics using this information, doing your own research, listening to the podcast I mentioned, and start retraining your brain to be able to decipher what are thoughts that are worth my time, energy, and effort, and which are thoughts that I just need to let go, and start rewriting that soundtrack in your head to focus on what is good and important and valuable to you and your well-being, and letting go those things that are detrimental. And on top of that, more importantly, is for you to understand that those thoughts that enter your brain do not reflect who you are or what kind of person you are. When they come in, just like I talked about the example earlier of like, if the scantily clad person wanders by, you notice that is there and you just let them go. Move along with their day. Move along with your day. The same thing with your thoughts. You can learn that those thoughts just come in and you let them go and you move on with your day. But that's a process if it's something you're not used to doing, but you can do it. You can rewrite your thought process so that you feel better about what's going on inside your brain. So mama, that's a heavy subject today. I feel like this whole series about what I learned in therapy is going to be some heavy stuff because obviously therapy is not for unicorns and rainbows, but I truly hope that hearing me say these words, that not all of your thoughts reflect who you are, you can learn to train your brain to do something different and to let go of the things that come in that make you upset or sad or worried or fearful. There's hope. Things can be different for you. They're definitely different for me. And I am so glad that I invested the time and energy and money into therapy. So don't get me wrong. This was a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of tears, and a lot of money to make these strides. But I know that that was such a good investment into my well-being, and that I can pass this information along to you and along to my kids and teach them how to be happy inside their minds. Our mind is a powerful thing, mamas. So with that, I will tell you have a great week, and we will talk next week, Successful Mama.
Thank you for listening to Motherhood in ADHD. For more resources, head over to our website, www.motherhoodinadhd.com.